Oh, it's great to see some familiar names joining. Wonderful. Apologies in advance. I don't know if those of you on here can hear my dog in the background. He's a little overexcited about some wildlife we have in our apartment right now. So hopefully that's not coming through. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. I know there will be some other folks joining in, but I am really pleased to be welcoming to this webinar along with Rihanna Putnam, our program manager, Rick Bonney, who I've had the pleasure of working for and alongside over the years in the growth of this field. Before I give a formal introduction to Rick, I did just want to mention a few things about this format. And to introduce myself, my name is Jennifer Shirk. I'm the director of the Association for Advancing Participatory Sciences. We are an organization that serves and supports the many people and many practices where scientific research is enriched by the perspectives of people from beyond traditional scientific institutions. And those practices go by many different terms. We are a place where people share insights from across those practices. And among the many things that we do to bring people together are things available on our website, live brief events like this webinar, working groups, and then a few landmark programs that we may be best known for, one being the journal Citizen Science Theory and Practice. I'll mention that Rick was the founding editor-in-chief of this journal and has really set the tone for a place to nurture emerging research and researchers who are describing how work in this field can best take place. This is an open access, so free to read online journal that's peer reviewed. And I encourage you to check it out if you are looking for practices about how to make this work as strong as it can be. Our other landmark program is our annual now conference. We conference, excuse me, every other year in person, alternating with online engagement. This year, we will be in Portland, Oregon in person. Really looking forward to an amazing event. We have great hosts there at Oregon State University and the STEM Research Center, among many others in the Pacific Northwest. It's going to be a fantastic program. If you haven't joined us, this is a great year to come and really get engaged with the rich work that's happening and learn together with colleagues from many different disciplines and perspectives on what it takes to do scientific research in partnership with the public. We have a preliminary program listed on the website. We are about to announce a late breaking call for posters, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested. I will also briefly mention that members in AAPS receive numerous benefits, among them conference registration discounts. So you may want to check out membership in AAPS as well as the conference itself. So again, one of the ways that we connect people around practices in this field is online. And it's a great way to meet up with and have conversations with folks who you may not get to hear from in other venues. And I am so pleased today to be welcoming Rick Bonney. Rick is the founder of the Citizen Science program at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. He is also a founder, along with others, of this association and really has a depth of knowledge and deep understanding about engagement practices for integrity in science and public engagement, and a particular passion and interest into how those things come together for um, natural resource management and conservation. And I see among folks who are on this webinar, many of you have had a chance to work with and alongside Rick in different areas of research from around the globe. So thank you for being with us and for adding your perspectives as well to this conversation. And I know you can all attest that there's so much that Rick has to share. I will turn this over to Rick in just a moment. Let me briefly just say a quick reminder that we do have a code of conduct for participating in our online events, and our best practices for taking advantage of engaging with speakers is to use the tools in Zoom to introduce yourself and ask questions. I'll make a note that although this slide says to introduce your or to ask questions in the chat, we will encourage you to put those questions into the Q&A tool so that we can be paying best attention to the questions rising to the top. Again, I really look forward to hearing from Rick about this program of materials supporting management and conservation science through public participation strategies. Rick, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And yep, I've been seeing some names come up across the screen, a lot of people I know, although many I haven't spoken with in the 5 years since I retired. It's great to see you. A lot of you know way more about participatory science than I do at this point. So this could be a little bit humbling, but let's go. And let me show you a few slides. Okay, have I got my first slide up there, Jennifer? How citizen or participatory science can save the world.
Perfect.
All right.
You're
Well,
awesome.
those of you who know me know that I've been using this title for a very long time. And I have to admit that things are looking a little bit bleak sometimes, but I still am staying the course. I still am believing that people working together and gathering information and thinking for themselves are one of the ways that we're going to survive some of the crises that are all around us. Those who know me also know that my title now has an emeritus in it. And yes, I did retire 5 years ago, but I've kept my finger in the pie, as you will see. Now, some of you who have heard me speak before have heard a little bit of my personal story. I think it's important to share for a little bit of context and what I hope to see happen in the future. That is me with my two younger sisters back in the 60s. The significance of this picture is the fact that that stereo that's on the shelf behind us was a Heath kit that my father built himself. So I grew up, and my sisters grew up with a father mentor who did stuff for himself all the time and was telling us, you can do this, you've got this. At the time that I was growing up in the 60s and in the very early 70s, he was a computer manager, actually in the defense business, working with SAC. And we lived in suburban New Jersey at 31 Moraine Road. And that area was not as built up as it is now. In particular, over to the left of the red marker, there were a lot of woods. And when I was in about the 7th or 8th grade, I said to my father, I need to do a science fair project. I want to do something interesting. I don't want to water one plant and kill the other one. What can I do? And he said, well, go out in the woods and learn some things about the wildlife around the house and around the Glacier Hills Association that nobody knows. And I said, cool. And I did, and I did a report, and I won the science fair project. But the thing that was so cool is I discovered flying squirrels lived there, and nobody knew that. And that was kind of, for me, the beginning of what I call citizen science, the idea that with very little training in science, I could go out and learn something scientific. And I even published it in the Glacial Deposit, which was our local newspaper. I published the sighting of this squirrel. And it was that interest in wildlife and nature, and the concept of citizen participation that led me to going to Cornell University in 1972. And believe it or not, that's what the Lab of Ornithology looked like. This probably is a 1969 picture, but that's what it looked like when I got there. And I went there because the Lab of Ornithology was and is and always will be a place that focuses on participatory sciences, starting with its founder, Arthur Allen, shown in the middle of this slide, with a bunch of women from the campus birding club. Even though he was an esteemed professor of ornithology, he made it a big part of his life's work to work with the public, and he had a lot to do with founding one of the earliest citizen science projects, the Cornell Nest Record Card Program in 1965, which I knew all about. And when I was a student at Cornell, I did a senior thesis where I analyzed the peregrine falcon data from the Christmas bird count and showed that those data could be used to estimate bird populations. It was one of the very earliest citizen science publications. So I've been interested in this for a long time. The lab has been interested in this for a long time. Um, After I graduated, I went to Hubbard Brook for a couple of years where I did research and published studies about bird study. And I also met the woman who would become my wife, Judy Burrell. And we decided after a couple of years in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, when I was invited back to the Lab of Ornithology to take over as director of education, that we would go because we had both done our graduate work there and we really loved the lab, the university, and the town. So the first thing that I did as the director of education um, was to write a proposal to the National Science Foundation, and I called it Public Participation in Ornithology, an introduction to environmental research. And I had to do a variety of different kinds of projects to meet the guidelines for public participation. But what I really, 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 really wanted to do was Project Tanager. I wanted to do Project Tanager because at that time, it was pretty well understood that neotropical migratory birds were declining through most parts of their range, at least on the eastern coast of the United States. And the idea was that it had to do with forest fragmentation. And tanagers were kind of like a totem species, a species that was declining and that we thought probably was declining because of forest fragmentation. And we wanted to know if that was actually true. And the only way we could figure out how we could do that was to send people out into forest fragments of different sizes over a period of 2 or 3 years to follow a very specific protocol to figure out the success rate for breeding for scarlet tanagers and other tanagers in forest tracts of different sizes. Now, this is not a talk on Project Tanager. I don't have time to go into it. I wish I did because I think it's one of the coolest projects that the lab ever did. But what I wanted to show you was that right off the bat, with our first project, we organized a partnership with the forest products industry, with the National Audubon Society, and with a couple of thousand birders. And we did this project and we ended up with a land manager's guide to improving habitat for scarlet tanagers and other forest interior birds. And the work was even published in, I think this was Conservation Biology where this paper appeared. So right off the bat, we showed that citizen science, which is what we called it at that time, was something that really would work. It could be complicated. It could involve sending people out to specific study sites. It could involve training and protocols with playbacks. Back then, it was with cassette tapes, believe it or not. And the lab went on to expand this to do other work with uh, thrushes and other forest interior birds after this. And by 1996, we actually had a full program of projects that were working with audiences of all different types on different kinds of conservation projects. We decided we were going to call it Citizen Science and published this article in our magazine, Living Bird. And pretty much all uses of citizen science around the world today that focus on data collection, as contrasted with Alan Irwin's more civic science definition of citizen science, stem from this work in this article. And I got to say, folks, that if I had known that was happen, I would have paid more attention to use of the term citizen. But I didn't know it was going to happen. And a little bit later, the Lab of Ornithology adopted its first mission statement, and it had citizen science in it. And I was very proud because we were about maybe we're the first organization to actually have citizen science in our mission. And at that time, people were coming to us and they were saying, how do you do this? We want to do it. We want to do it with other organisms. We want to do it in other places. And so a whole team of us published an article in Bioscience that were the toolkit steps for project design. And this article has been cited over the years a few thousand times. It's been used by a lot of people to develop projects. And right now, what I want to do is switch over to a different slideshow and show you a little bit about what happened after I retired 5 years ago. What had happened was, as I was about 5 years or about 4 or 5 years from retirement, the Fish and Wildlife Service, actually, you know what? I just screwed up. I'm very, very rusty. I'm sorry. I don't give very many talks anymore. And I wasn't quite done with the slides that I wanted to show. Was I? Okay, I guess I was. All right. And I'm not even embarrassed because I'm too old for that at this point. So the Fish and Wildlife Service had asked Jennifer Shirk and me to do some work to try to understand the extent to which citizen science was being used in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we did that, and that caught the attention of the other agencies. And they said, let's start a citizen science interagency task force and really show agency staff how the best way to do citizen science focused on conservation and management. And so for quite a long time, a bunch of us worked on this toolkit, which is now done. And I want to show you a little bit about it right now. And I want to acknowledge Hannah Weber, the Marine Ecology Director at the Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park, who is a partner in all of this work. Who couldn't be here with us today, who's now on the board of the association, though. And because Hannah and I were joined at the hip on this project and worked on most parts of it together. So right now, lands and waters, as we all know, they face many, many threats. And conserving lands and waters require a lot of data collected over large areas over long time spans on different variables and using standardized repeatable procedures. That's what we mean when we talk about citizen science. Participatory or citizen science can actually really do this. And many agencies use it to a certain degree. And let's see. Okay, now I can see my slides. And the agencies are empowered to employ the tool of citizen science under the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act of 2017. And that's one of the reasons that we decided that we would use the term citizen science for this toolkit, because it was confusing to change it. And also because of this Citizen Science Act, which empowered the agencies to do it. And we thought there would be a lot of confusion if we started up with another name. Okay, now why are my slides not advancing anymore? Okay, my whole screen is locked up on me. All right. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Rick.
All right.
Thanks.
This is what happens with an old then broken machine. Okay.
Is there something that I could pull up on this end, like a screen share of the toolkit that would help you tell the story?
Let's see. All right, let's see if they'll go again. Okay, I told you that some of the many agencies, all of the agencies are using citizen science to a certain extent, and I wanted to share some examples really quickly of how that's being done. So, for example,
Rick,
on Midway Atoll
before you
National
go
Park,
on, you're not sharing your
yeah.
screen anymore. Is it working?
Uh,
There we go.
All right. Can you see that?
Perfect.
All right. So
Thank you.
the Fish and Wildlife Service wanted to know how to control invasive golden crownbeard on the Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. And then do that, they developed the citizen science program to learn how quickly this plant grows and the timing of its growth from one life cycle to the next. So they came up with a protocol, a data forms, and they sent people out onto the atoll to collect these data. And from the data that they collected, they learned that they needed a 30-day rotation for pesticide application. They didn't know that before this project, but using the 30-day rotation and judicious applications of pesticide, they're now maintaining this plant at or below 1% ground cover across the refuge. As another example, National Park Service wanted to know what parks suffer from mercury pollution. And one way that you can learn about mercury pollution is with sentinel objects, sentinel animals like dragonflies. And so what they did was they came up with a protocol and data forms and a training procedure, and they sent people out into the national parks to collect dragonfly larvae, which they then sent out for analysis. And from this work, they were able to come up with an actual index, an impairment index in parks all across the country. And for some reason, my slide is not showing me something that it's supposed to be showing me about just how many parks, but there were there was like 100 parks and also some wildlife refuges and other NGOs that also used this project. The Forest Service wanted to know about how healthy the Colorado big brown bat population was, and particularly they were worried about white nose syndrome. And there were a lot of agencies working together to monitor Colorado big brown bats. So they all worked together. They came up with a protocol, a citizen science project. They collected data. They began to learn about the health of the colonies across the state. And very importantly, their citizen scientists were able to identify candidate roost sites where they could start vaccinating bats so they could try to see if that would help to mitigate the problem of the white nose syndrome. The Bureau of Land Management was worried about the impacts of alternative energy development in the Sonoran Desert, and particularly on bird populations. Now, most of you probably know about eBird, and you know that eBird collects data from across the world, and including in the Sonoran Desert, but not in all of the locations where data were needed. So they came up with desert avocaching, which combined birding and geocaching, and they sent participants out to specific areas to gather data on specific birds that they felt might be impacted by the energy development. And through that, they got 72 respondents, which may not sound like a lot, but it was enough to do indexes for all of the species of concern. And they're using those data now in the management and mitigation plans for alternative energy development through the Sonoran Desert. There you go, 409 surveys, 53 locations, 16,000 birds, and 102 species. And finally, a true community science project. Indigenous communities required conservation of culturally significant plants and forests to work together on this. We need to train you, Forest Service staff, to understand what plants are important to us and where they are. And they work together to create the Tribal Nations Botanical Research Collaborative. And now, after 3 or 4 years, they've had nearly 10,000 observations on many species, about 600 identifiers and over 2,000 observers. And they're using the data from that project to restore and to manage populations of these culturally significant plants across many Forest Service lands. Now, all of these example projects have measurable science or management outcomes. Undertaking actions to control invasive species, roost sites suitable for white nose syndrome vaccine, an impairment map created, mitigation plans for alternative energy, and restoration and management and access to culturally important plants. Why did they have these outcomes? Because they were all carefully planned and executed. They were not done haphazardly, willy-nilly. But planning and executing a project like this requires consideration of a lot of different issues. Some people like to scare people away from citizen science with diagrams like this that say this is everything you have to figure out and you got to do it all at once. But we thought there was a simpler way. We thought we could come up with an interagency citizen science toolkit, which could be used by anyone, that would help to develop and design and implement and evaluate a citizen science project focused on conservation, data collection for conservation and management. And we spent over 2 years putting this together. And it's funny, it looks a lot like our original bioscience and the original toolkit that Jennifer and I did almost 20 years ago. Um, I guess there aren't too many surprises there. But what's different about this one is that when we put it together, we scoured the literature. We looked at all of the websites. We looked at all of the guides. We looked at them even if they were focused on education, because we knew that there was a lot of important information about education and communication that needed to be integrated into a project focused on conservation. Because if your project is not clear and easy to understand, then it isn't going to work. And we had a few different meetings and we involved a lot of different people. We had a pretty big project team. We had a pretty big interagency team. We had advisors, and every single one of the modules was reviewed by people deeply familiar with that subject. And I think some of the people who were reviewers, I think a few people on this slide here on the webinar today. So I just want to show you quickly what this new toolkit looks like. I don't have time to get into it in any depth, but there are 10 modules. And the first module is Understanding Citizen Science, an overview of the field. And it focuses on really understanding how citizen science can be used in many domains for research and for conservation and for management. It gives a lot of examples that I just gave. In some ways, it's fairly similar to the synopsis that I just gave just now. The second module focuses on is whether citizen science is a good tool for your needs, because it isn't always. People need to understand this. So we created a table. This is borrowed from Michael Pocock's earlier table from his 2014 strategic framework paper. And we changed it some, we adapted it to meet the needs for our toolkit, but it's the same basic idea that if you have vague goals and objectives, the project probably will be a challenging one to do for citizen science. If in-depth training is needed, it may be challenging to do. But if it has clear goals and objectives and minimal training and simple protocols and it's easy to recruit, then it may have a good chance of working. The third module is focused on project goals and objectives and developing a project model. Now, not all projects do goal setting and not all make objectives and not all developing a project model, but they really, really should. And this chapter or this module is focused on explaining what is a goal, what is an objective, what is a measurable outcome, how do you do a project model, how do you put that all together? And each one of these modules has a lot of examples of actual agency projects that are using these techniques and these designs. So the voice of the actual citizen science agency staff are being heard throughout the modules. The fourth one is on building a project team and identifying the audience for the project. And we scare people here with who you will need on the team: communication specialist, evaluator, partnership coordinators, and on and on and on. That this is a real team. I think this one is Alabama Water Watch, if I remember correctly. But we talk in the module about how different people can sometimes fill multiple roles, or how you can go outside of the team to get these roles met. So we first scare people, but then we try to say, okay, but here's how you can make this all work for yourself. But we want people to understand that a citizen science project is a complex undertaking that requires a lot of steps and a lot of people to make it work right. The next module focuses on engaging stakeholders and project partners. And we get into defining what a stakeholder is and why you need stakeholders, people who are going to use the data when you're done and have a vested interest in the project, and why you want to bring them in right from the beginning, and what the difference between a stakeholder and a project partner is. And sometimes it's not much. we have a lot of examples in here, including that Project Tanager example where we showed how we work with the forest products industry and the Audubon Society and the Forest Service, which actually helped us to figure out where the different forest fragments would be on forests that we could send birders out to do their studies. The next one is about collecting and managing citizen science data. And this is one that everybody is interested in. Everybody wants to know, how do we do this? This is a pretty in-depth chapter, but it can't be a whole book on data management. There are books on it. This points people to books on it. It talks about quality assurance and quality control and different protocols that can be followed. It talks about the difference between starting out with very casual observations, going to standardized observations, and what the differences are and when one can be used and when another can be used. After that, we have what I think is one of the most important chapters or modules in the whole project, in the whole toolkit, which says, don't start from scratch. Back in the very first toolkit that Jennifer and I did together, there was a step 0. And the step 0 said, are you sure you really need to do this? There might be a project already doing what you want to do. And there might be. Or you might be able to develop a project using an existing platform like eBird or iNaturalist or NPN or citsci.org, which allows people to design their own projects. And this module goes into depth in each one of these platforms and how it can be used, and gives examples of how it's been used for successful agency projects. And also mentions a few other platforms besides these 4, because these are not the only good ones. After that, we get into recruiting and training and engaging project participants. We talk about how there's no such thing as the general public, and that you really need to figure out who are the people that you're going to recruit and what skills that they need and how long they're going to be involved and how often they're going to have to do it and what are their interests and how does engaging them benefit them, because if it doesn't benefit them, they're not going to engage, or at least not for very long. And we explain that recruiting is actually a form of marketing. Then we get into sharing project results with participants and stakeholders in the wider world. And we talk about sharing raw data and why that can be a good practice and how there are considerations if you do. But then we also go through sharing data summaries and sharing data through publications, and all the different ways you can make data be interactive on the web and how that can benefit the participants as well as the people who are going to use the data. On developing and implementing citizen science projects for which science. And so why that did that is because all of these slideshows, all 10 of them, all of the toolkit steps have a slide program that goes with them, and it's a video that I narrated, and they're all available, and I can show you in a minute how to do that. And then finally, under evaluation, we talk about formative evaluation and summative evaluation, and we have quite a lot of information in here to help people understand how to use evaluation techniques to make sure that their project is successful. So all of this material is now available on the Schoodic Institute website. We will send this out afterwards later so that you have this information. The toolkit is all there in a PDF form. You can read it all, or you can listen to the videos, watch the videos of me narrating each one of these slideshows, because I just showed you one slide from each one as a teaser. And in addition to that, there are 10 3-page citizen science case studies from all 4 of the agencies, so you can dive into these projects much more deeply. If you were to listen to all the videos, it would take about 4 hours, so you wouldn't want to do it all at once. They range from 18 to 30 minutes. And at some point, all of this material will probably be going up onto the agency websites, if the agencies still have websites, in another few weeks.